Match the fabric selvage to selvage. Selvage is the uncut portion of the fabric with the least amount of stretch. Lay out the fabric pieces as instructed. Remember to clip into your notches. This is very important because that's your matching guide. Using tracing paper, trace the stitch symbol onto the wrong side of the fabric. Mark an X with your tracing wheel or draw a circle symbol as demonstrated. Pin the interfacing and facing wrong sides together. Stitch 1/4 inch from the raw edge. You can also use the edge of your sewing foot as a guide. Lay the front skirt pieces over the skirt back, right sides together, pin, and sew using your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You may finish the seams using any of the techniques outlined in the video link above. A link is also located below this video. Place the yoke over the top edge of the skirt right sides together. Make sure to match the notches. The yoke is curved, so add as many pins as required. This is going to keep the edges of the skirt and the yoke aligned and in place while sewing. Because you're sewing on a curve, it's very important to take your time. Stop in between to make sure the fabric remains flat and does not gather towards the yoke. Please notice how I pull the skirt away as I'm sewing to keep the fabric flat and smooth. Pin the facing to the yoke, right sides together, and sew using the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Before turning the facing over to the wrong side of the skirt, you will need to cut down on some of the bulk. Cut away at the 1/4 inch stitching that was initially used to attach the yoke to the interfacing. Now make small notches into the fabric without going into the seam. This will help to release some of the tension. In order to avoid the yoke from rolling over, we need to top stitch the facing. Take the seam allowance and pull it towards the facing. This way the seam allowance is away from the yoke and keeps it flat. Now top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Place a piece of silk organza or light muslin over the yoke and press the facing using steam. Come down 5/8 of an inch from the top edge of the yoke and center back of the skirt and either use a basting stitch or pencil to draw a guide for the zipper. Mark off where the pull tab begins on the zipper. Place the zipper in the center of the skirt with the tab facing down. Match the marks on the zipper to the basting stitches on the skirt and pin. The coils of the zipper will touch the basting stitches on the center back. Use an invisible zipper foot to sew. If you need a better demo, please watch my video on how to insert an invisible zipper. The link is located on the screen and also below the video. Match the zipper to the opposite side of the skirt. Before sewing, pin to make sure the yoke seams match. If they do not match, adjust the zipper by pulling it past or below the guide on the skirt. Once the yoke seams match, you can pin and sew. Now to close up the center back of the skirt. Pin the center back together and stop right before the self-facing begins. Use the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew. You will have a slight gap in between stitches, and that's fine. Using a regular zipper foot, sew down the tabs. Use the highest stitch setting on the machine to sew a temporary stitch to the remainder of the skirt opening. Do not backstitch. From the circle or X symbol on the skirt, stitch 5/8 of an inch toward the facing, backstitch to reinforce the stitch. Clip into the corner without going into the center back stitches. Base stitch the facing to the skirt. Turn the skirt right side out and machine stitch using a permanent stitch through all thickness. Check to make sure the self-facing sits on the left side. Do not backstitch on this step. Snip long strands of thread. Using a sewing needle, push the thread onto the wrong side of the skirt and tie a knot to secure the ends. The raw edge of the hem must be finished before continuing with the next step. Turn up the 2-inch hem and use a hem stitch. This is a quick and easy way to hem stitches in place. Start by tacking down the facing and then bringing the needle through the hem. Stitch diagonally to the left, picking up few fibers of the main fabric. Stitch diagonally again by picking up a couple of fibers close to the edge of the finish. Tack down the self-facing and you're done. You may finish the yoke facing any way you like. However, I prefer to use a Hong Kong finish. I'll show you how to set it up using the bias strip. If you like the look, you can watch a detailed video of the steps listed in the link above or below this video. Before moving forward, finish the center back of the skirt. I use the zigzag and pinking method. Now I'll stitch 1/4 inch into the lower portion of the waistband and trim down using a pinking shear. Now to attach the yoke to the facing. Begin by marking off 5/8 inch seam allowance on the wrong side of the facing. The goal is to stitch on that red guideline. The red guideline will sit about 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper coils. If the raw edges of the yoke and the facing are perfectly aligned, you're going to end up with a big gap once the facing is turned onto the right side. Please notice how the raw edge of the facing is extending outside the raw edge of the yoke. Using a regular zipper foot, stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper teeth. If you're having a difficult time getting a close stitch, then I would just highly recommend hand stitching the facing onto the zipper. If you decide to hand stitch, then go back at it a second time just to reinforce that area. Also remember to backstitch. If needed, cut away some of the bulk at the corner of the yoke. Make sure not to cut too much into the seams. Turn to the right side and use a point turner to push out the corners or use a yarn needle. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.